Early last month, we had taken Nathan back to Anderson, where he's starting his sophomore year, and we needed to take two vehicles. One because there was too much stuff, and so we had his car and our minivan. And since there's only three of us going, we're going to split the ride up. Nathan rides with me to Charlotte, and then from Charlotte to Anderson, he rides with Caroline. And you're aware of this. Well, actually, a couple of things. You're aware I like bluegrass, and you're aware that my mind is a strange place, right? So as we are in the car, and Nathan is a worship music major, and so while we were in the car, I decided that I would issue to him a challenge. And here's the challenge. I said, you need to operate as though you are announcing a formal audition, a formal vocal audition before the music faculty at Anderson. And what you have to do is to use a very formal voice, and you have to announce the song that you're going to sing, but it has to be a bluegrass song with obscure titles. So, for example, today I will be performing Hot Corn, Cold Corn in G. Bluegrass has a lot of goofy titles, and so anyway, Nathan was game for this, and we did this for miles, though, and he kept looking up stuff, and I was rattling through my mind different titles. The Ballad of Jed Clampett in A. Turkey in the Straw. Now I'll be performing for you Possum Up a Stump. Just goofy titles, though, and it was fun, though, because you have this contrast between these silly titles with that formal-sounding tone, and it really drives home the point that style of music really has some goofy titled songs. And it's one thing for me to say there are some silly titles in bluegrass. It's another thing for me to say, Ballad of Jed Clampett in A. It drives the point home. So many times we are seeking to use different avenues other than just flatly communicating a series of facts to drive home a thought, particularly one that we believe to be important. Jesus is doing that today in the passage we're going to be looking at, and we're doing so, but it's because it's part of a continuing series that I'm calling Wedding Album. And in both Old and New Testament, God is communicating spiritual truth, points that he wants us to get and understand. And instead of just saying, hey, this is how it is, he uses marriage to somehow, or things around marriage, to drive home that point, believing and confident that through that we can understand this better. And today what we're going to see is that Jesus is going to use an illustration from marriage, specifically from a wedding banquet, to drive home the point of how our relationship with him as a follower of Christ actually works. He's going to communicate what's the nature of the relationship that we actually have with him. So what is that? Look with me in your Bibles today to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew 22. There Jesus is sharing a parable in these first 14 verses. And we read in verse 1 that once more Jesus spoke to them in parables. And in this instance, he said, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to summon those invited to the banquet, but they didn't want to come. Again, he sent out other servants and said, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My ox and fatted calf have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. But they paid no attention and went away, one to his own farm, another to his business. While the rest, they seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged, and he sent out his troops, killed those murderers, and burned down their city. Then he told his servants, the banquet is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Go then to where the roads exit the city, and invite everyone you find to the banquet. So those servants went out on the roads and gathered everyone they found, both evil and good. The wedding banquet was filled with guests. When the king came in to see the guest, he saw a man there who was not dressed for a wedding. So he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him up hand and foot, throw him into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen." Jesus certainly is saying something more than just a flat statement here. He's seeking to communicate something. And I believe ultimately what he is seeking to do is to communicate to us the nature of God's invitation to a person, the nature of God's invitation to me or to you, to anyone, to know and follow him. But what does he say about that? It's going to take us a moment to get there. But what I want to do is first to unpack what's going on in the story. And before we can ever think application, we have to ask ourselves this: what does a passage mean? It will never mean today what it did not mean then. Meaning, with respect to the biblical passages, I believe to be singular. Application is multitudinous. There's lots of application, but meaning is singular. So what did it say? What did it mean? And then what do we do with this? All right, so in this story, Jesus says there is a king, and this king is going to and has invited people to a wedding feast. Now, you're aware that first century weddings were a bigger deal than they are today, but weddings have always, in virtually every culture, those are significant milestones, significant occasions, and various cultures do them and experience them in different ways, but we always tend to make a big deal out of them. Such was the case also in the first century, and if there was going to be a wedding, there was going to be a celebration of this. As part of all that was going to go on, there was going to be a wedding feast. And we're told that the king sends out invitations to this. Now, what was going on in the first century is somewhat similar, but a little bit different from how things operate today. Maybe in the past year or in the months to come, you'll go to your mailbox one day and you will get a save the date card. There's someone that you know that is getting married, and so they want you just to go ahead and put it on your calendar that we are getting married next June, or whenever it is that the wedding is going to take place. So go ahead and mark that on your calendar. This was kind of like that in the first century, except they didn't say the actual date. The invitation would be this: there is a wedding that is going to take place. You are invited to celebrate this, to be a part of this. The king has invited you to this wedding, and as it gets closer, as it gets about time, then a second invitation will come that says, oh, date, time, place. So this general invitation has gone out, and people would have thought, okay, fine, I have been invited to this wedding feast that the king has invited me for his son. So this is kind of a big deal. It's not just invited to Joe Schmo's wedding. This is the king's son that you have been invited to celebrate this wedding. But we're told in the parable that these servants go out and they invite, but many just didn't want to come. And so he sent servants again. And with this second invite, then they're going to get more detail. And there was two various types of responses. And for the vast majority, the response was just indifference. I'm not going to stop farming. I'm not going to take any time off to go to this. I'm just going to continue my ordinary routine life as if this has never taken place. Others decided they were going to accost and injure and even kill those that have shown up to invite them to this wedding. Well, how is the king going to feel about that? Well, he's not happy at all. And so we're told he dispatches troops and not only kills them, but destroys their city. At that point, an invitation is sent out much more broadly, exponentially more broadly. And they said, go to the exits of the city, go to high traffic areas, and you invite anybody and everybody that possibly can to be invited to this wedding celebration. And it seems that many come. And when the king arrives at the wedding celebration, he notices that there is one guy who is, well, he looks like he's going to a NASCAR race and not going to a wedding. And he says, how did you get in here looking like that? And he is sent out and banished. So that's the story. Kind of a strange story. It doesn't read like the Three Little Pigs or Snow White or anything like that. And Jesus wasn't interested in telling bedtime stories. He wasn't just saying, here, come gather and let me appeal to your imagination. He would say something like this, and he would use a story like this because he is seeking to communicate truth. He's seeking to communicate an idea that otherwise they might not have gotten, or in this case, to really drive home an important point. And the point of what Jesus is describing here has to do with the nature of the invitation that God gives to a person to follow him. And so he uses this story, this illustration, to drive that point home. Now, if Jesus is using an illustration, if he's using a parable, well, parables have items in the story that stand or represent other things. So in this parable, in this story, you've got a king. Well, who might the king represent? I think it's pretty clear that the king represents God. And who might the son of the king be? Well, it's the Son of God. It is Jesus. This wedding that is to take place, it seems that this wedding that is taking place is this celebration of this relationship that exists between the Son and what would be his bride. Well, we know from the rest of the story, from the rest of Scripture, that the bride, that's all those that are the followers of God. And with respect to this wedding celebration, people are invited. But initially, not everyone. It's a smaller group that receives this. Well, what is that talking about? Well, I think that smaller group that it's representing takes a little imagination, I believe, to be the nation of Israel, to be Jews. And you remember back in the days of the Old Testament, and God decided that he was going to reveal himself to the world, but he was going to start through a people. And he began this covenant relationship with Abraham and those that would be his descendants. And he wanted to reveal himself to them, invite them into a relationship with him, even though because of their sin, even because of their choices, they were separated from him. He wanted to provide a means where they could have a relationship with him and then use them to open that up to others, that they could be a light to the nations. And so that's how it started. And God established this relationship, and he revealed himself to what we know as Israel. And he reveals himself to these Jews, and as part of what was going on, God was describing, and he sent messenger after messenger, prophet after prophet, to describe that the temporary covering for sin and all this sacrificial system, that's not going to go on forever. But ultimately, there is going to be a Messiah who is to come from this group. And this Messiah is going to be the Savior of you. Is going to be the Savior of the world. And I guess as long as people talked about it, they were like, okay, that's good. I mean, that's good news. We'll be looking for that Messiah. And so we don't know exactly when he's going to come, when he's going to show up, when that's going to take place. But generally speaking, that's a positive thought. Until it is that the Messiah actually comes. And when Jesus actually comes, there's two basic forms of response. Primarily, now obviously there were some that became followers of his, but the vast majority were indifferent. The vast majority were like, that's kind of interesting. That's a novel show for a little while. And the crowds were great for a while, but then they began to diminish. And many just decided, I don't want anything to do with Jesus. But then ultimately there were those that decided, we want to take his life. We want to make sure that he dies. Not only did that become the experience for Jesus, but so many prophets in the Old Testament, those that God had sent to describe and to invite people into relationship, they were not just passively rejected, but violently rejected. All right, so King is God, Jesus is the Son, wedding is this invitation to a relationship with him. Jews initially they were okay with this until it became time, and then they rejected. So what happens then? Well, in the parable, the invitation is extended to all kinds of people. Folks that weren't initially on the invite list, good people, bad people, and folks with stellar reputations, and folks with wonderful family last names and fancy pedigree, and just ordinary plain Joes. All of these folks show up, and they are invited to the wedding, and then we'll deal with the poorly dressed guy in a second. So that's what's going on. This is what some of the key things stand for, what they represent. But Jesus is using this to drive home a point. Well, what's the point? I think the point is this, that he's telling me, he's telling you, he's telling everybody that reads this, this is the nature of an invitation that God extends to you, to me, to anyone with respect to knowing and following him. Well, what's he saying about it? Well, I think first of all, what he communicates is this. It is an invitation that is rooted in grace. It is absolutely an invitation that is rooted in grace. And I think you see this in a couple of different instances. Once the initial group, so these Jews have been invited to this, invited to a relationship, but they decide, we don't want this. And what are they described as in verse 8? They're described as not having been worthy. So they were not worthy of the invitation that they received. And so the invitation to know and have a relationship with God, it gets expanded. It gets expanded to people that aren't Jews. Not only that, we're told that there are people that are evil and good. Just people that are out on the roads, people that are gathered. It's anybody. It's influential people. It's a whole bunch of ordinaries. It's plain Joes. It's everybody that winds up getting invited to this. This further drives home the point that these are individuals that receive an invitation from God for which they are not intrinsically worthy of. When you received, if you're a follower of God, when you received an invitation, when he began to knock at the door of your heart, we have to get this point driven home in our minds. We were not worthy of that. We simply were not. There was nothing about me, there's nothing about you that says that you're so special that somehow, some way, you deserved God saying, hey, you should be able to have a relationship with me. There's nothing intrinsically about us that makes us a catch for God. We simply are not. Too often, I think in the pursuit of highlighting God's love for us, we consciously or subconsciously begin to view ourselves as more than we really are. And honestly, throughout the whole of my life, and I don't know if this is a true statement or not, but I've heard this so many times, and I believe that this statement highlights the love of God. But the statement is this: if I was the only lost one, he would have given his life just for me. Part of that statement is rooted in this notion: somehow I'm worth it. Somehow I deserve this. Somehow, some way, there's something special, something particularly unique about me where God wanted to have a relationship with me. But the simple truth is, the invitation that God extends has always been and will always be to people that don't deserve it, because none of us does. You say, well, I don't know if I buy that. Well, let me explain it this way. 1993 was a significant year for me because that was the year that I finished high school, headed off to college in the fall of that year. And so for me, it was a year of transition. But in the city of Minneapolis, there was a lady named Mary Johnson who her life changed, at least at that point, inextricably for the worst. And that was because her 16-year-old son was murdered. And he was murdered by another 16-year-old named O'Shea Israel. So her son is murdered. And he had so much promise. He had his whole life before him, and a 16-year-old kid, punk, kills him. And if you're the parent, if you're the mother of a child who has been without cause murdered, well, how are you feeling? Well, you're feeling terrible. You are stewing with anger, stewing with bitterness, stewing with rage. And that's how this woman operated for years. More than a decade goes by, and Mary Johnson is just absolutely seething with hatred and just ongoing fury at O'Shea Israel for what he had done to her son and how she had taken his life and how in many ways she felt like he had ruined hers. After years of this just becoming this trickling, growing furnace inside, this woman who knew and had a relationship with God felt, for some reason, I feel like God is burdening me to go see this young man in jail. And because of his age, he did not get life without parole. And she decided, though, she was going to go see him. And this was tough. She goes to see him, and part of what she does in that conversation is to tell him how she feels, to let him know fully what he took from her. And for some reason, as that conversation ended, she decided, I'm going to ask him for a hug. And then she hugs the guy that killed her son. Well, it wasn't that at that point a light switch went off and everything was okay, because she's still wrestling with all of these emotions. But it seemed as if the shell was cracked, and she believed at that point, after that hug, this was just a dumb kid acting dumb, and maybe he's not this thing I have made him to be that is continuing to ruin my life. She continued to pay him some visits, much to the surprise of other people, because why would you treat somebody with any kindness who had killed your son? After 17 years, O'Shea Israel is released from prison. Because of his age when he was convicted, because of the time served, he was released. What was interesting and people were surprised by is that this mother, it wasn't simply that she had gone to visit him in jail. She decided once he was released, she wanted to help him. She wanted to help him start a life, to experience life on the outside successfully. Among the things that she did, she helped him find a place to live. She helped him find an apartment. But you know where the apartment was? It was right next door to her. And she would have him over for dinner. They became shockingly and amazingly quite close, to the point that he described her as his second mother. And Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel wound up starting a program, a ministry called From Death to Life. And one of the things that she said was this: that the person who created the single greatest void in her life, she invited him to then become a part of it. The one who had created the single greatest void in her life, she then asked to become a part of it. That's the gospel. You and I, who have been as people, when we pat ourselves on the back and think ourselves to be so wonderful, but we come into this world not knowing God, separated from God, and continuing to operate in ways that arouse his anger, that are completely out of bounds, that are even against the laws that he's written on our hearts, and we're headed in the opposite direction. Not only that, but it was because of what we have done that it resulted in the death of the Son, the sacrifice of Jesus, the humiliation of Jesus. And yet he invites those people to become a part of his life. Maybe that's why we're still singing songs like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I am not, and the gospel tells me the invitation of God is not, hey, Jesus won, God won the lottery when he got me. No. Unworthy, undeserving people got an invitation. Jesus is trying to drive that point home. Get it straight in your mind that the gospel is an invitation that is rooted in grace. Not only that, it is an invitation that has expectation. It's an invitation that has expectation. In this parable, we've got the, the broad group has been invited. The servants have gone out into the other place. They've gone to the intersections to where people are gathering, and they've invited all these people, good people, bad people, influential, non-influential, ordinaries. All these people have been invited. So the king finally, on the day of this wedding celebration, shows up, and he sees a guy, he's not dressed at all for this. And it has always been the case in every single generation. There are particular instances that have sometimes stated or at least expected dress code, right? So if, for example, I walked in here this morning with a bathing suit and a tank top, you might have thought that to be a bit strange. If you go to a wedding, in fact, I mean, so we tend not to wear suits much anymore, but we keep them for weddings and funerals, right? So either way, somebody dies, but I'm just joking. Anyway, but we'll keep suits around, more formal dresses for weddings and funerals because, I mean, again, you're not going to a wedding with, you know, cut-off jeans, a tank top, and flip-flops. That's probably, unless it's on the beach and they said, hey, dress like that, you're not going to do that. You're going to, based on the occasion, dress to fit the occasion. And in this particular story, Jesus says that there is this wedding feast, and it's the wedding feast for who? The king's son. This is a royal wedding. Now, when we watch royal weddings on TV, what do they look like? I mean, they're dressed to the nines. They have peacocks sitting on top of their head and big birthday cakes sitting. I mean, all sorts of fancy attire that they are wearing. Why? Because of the nature of the occasion. And why is that? It is because you expect that. Now, there is an invitation that has been extended, but hear me with this. With the invitation, there is an expectation, and here it is. If you have been invited and have responded to the invitation of God to know and follow Him, the expectation is simple. You operate like it. You operate as someone who is actually following His example, who is actually following His lead. In plain terms, doing the stuff that He says to do. As the Lord invites people into a relationship with Him, it is a free gift, to be sure. But receiving that gift, we should, in responding to that, operate as though we actually have. And the expectation of God for me is, the expectation of God for you, and any that come to know and follow Him, is that we operate as we are actually a follower of His. I've been pastoring since 2001, and I've done a lot of funerals, and it's interesting in that time that I've seen a fair amount of change in funerals. Most of you have probably taken note of this as well. Back in 2001, I bet I did maybe 5% of the funerals I would do would be cremation. Almost all of them were traditional casket and burial. Now, I bet 80% of what I do are cremation. So we've seen a change with that. And there are some things that cremation makes so much easier. For one thing, you can schedule it whenever because you're not thinking about, we've got to get to the cemetery by this time. We've got to coordinate with them and make sure that that's possible. We've got to get there and get out by this particular time. So you can kind of have it whenever. That's nice. Another thing that's not required when you have cremation is this. You don't need pallbearers. You just don't. And with all these funerals that I have done, and even some that I'm sure will occur in the future, families will have or will opt to do traditional casket and burial. Sometimes a family will ask me about pallbearers, sometimes to ask for suggestions, or they will just in passing talk about individuals that they would like to ask to serve as a pallbearer. And one of the things that I will say to them, sometimes in particular based on some of the names that they might say, is this. Listen, it is really sincerely an honor for someone to be asked to serve in that capacity. And I understand why you would say, well, this was such a good friend of Daddy's. He would be honored if I asked him to serve as a pallbearer. I said, but remember this. Ultimately, asking someone to serve as a pallbearer is not just an honor, but there's something that they need to do. They need to be able to carry a casket with a body inside of it. And that's not real light. And so you don't need Methuselah holding the walker and the cane and the oxygen tank, trying to hold on. Maybe you could make it a 2-for-1. I don't know. But at the end of the day, you have to remind yourself, yes, this is an honor to be asked to be this. But with this, there's an expectation. You've got to do something with this. The simple truth is that the invitation of God to have a relationship with Him, it is free. You don't pay for it. You don't write a check. You're not working to earn it back. But if you respond to it, the expectation, flatly stated, is that you operate as one that actually is a follower of Christ. And too many times, I think what we do is that we shortchange the gospel, and the extent to which we are saying to people and sharing with them what it is that God has done, we are leading them to say, oh, well, don't you want to go to heaven? Don't you want to go to heaven? Hell's an awful place. I mean, heaven's wonderful. Oh, yeah. And we're leading people to say yes to heaven, but not inviting them to actually follow Jesus. We're leading them to say yes to heaven, but never say yes to Him. And the invitation of God is an invitation that is free, but it is always and will always be an invitation with expectation. But the last thing that Jesus drives home is this, that it is an invitation with real consequence. It's an invitation with real consequence. In this parable, we see this one that he just decided, I'm going to show up for the wedding because, well, it's maybe they have open bar at it, and maybe there's a buffet, and so I'm going to eat good and drink good at this wedding, and so that's why I'm going to go. And shows up with bathing suit and tank top, flip-flops on, and the king says, what are you in here looking like this? And he has the attendants tie him up, hand and foot, and send him out. So even though there was a response, hey, I'm interested and I'm interested in all the goodies, I'm interested in all the freebies, but I don't want to operate as though I have positively responded. It's all about me, it's all about what I get. The response is, you don't get to share in this. You don't get to experience the fruit of this invitation. And again, if this invitation is to have a relationship with God, this becomes an individual that does not have a relationship with God. Yes, they might have liked some of the perks, they might have liked some of the benefits, but it's all about me. It's all about me. We don't talk truthfully a great deal about this, but certainly the Bible speaks a great deal about how wonderful and beautiful and perfect heaven is. Everything that sin messed up, we're going to see how it is made right in heaven. But the same Bible that tells us about that tells us also about an awful place called hell that is, when we are trying to summarize or to use a handle to communicate the worst things that you could possibly experience, the word that we use is hell, because there is an actual place called that. And to experience a relationship with God means that you do not experience that you experience heaven, that you experience life the way it was intended to be, that you experience perfection the way that God originally made things, that becomes your reality. Listen, that's huge. In short, what I'm saying is that the invitation of God is one that has, based on what you do with it, tremendous, real, and powerful, eternally consequential results. You know, over the years, a few times I have gotten in the mail, maybe what some of you have as well, and most recently for me, it had Guilford County listed on the outside, and at first I thought it was a tax bill, and so even though that's done in escrow, I figured that's kind of what it was. And then I open it up, and I see I'm invited to something. Lucky me, I get to serve on a jury. Well, I become grateful that I opened that and didn't just toss it in the trash. And that invitation has some instructions, some stuff that I need to do. And so as it gets closer to the date of whenever this is that I am supposed to arrive, among other things I need to do is the night before I need to call. I need to call the courthouse and see if I am still needed and what you're hoping is. And so that's what you're hoping. But do you know what you're going to do with that invitation? You're going to respond to it. Why? because failure to do so has potentially bad, really bad consequences. You decide just to ignore a jury summons, well, a bench warrant can be issued for your arrest. That doesn't mean necessarily the sheriff's department is going to search you out, but the next time you're pulled over for a speeding ticket, do you know what happens? You don't go home. You don't pass go. You go directly to jail. So you're going to pay attention to that jury summons. Why? Because that invitation has real consequence. In multiplied different ways and lots of different facets, Jesus has been and is seeking to drive home how an invitation from him actually works. It is hugely consequential. It actually determines what eternity is like for you. It is a free invitation that is extended to you, but it does have it does have expectations, and it is overwhelmingly rooted and wrapped in his grace. Well, if that's how it works, if that's the nature of God's invitation, let me ask you this. What have you done with his invitation for you? Now, some of you may say, well, I accepted that. I responded in faith, some of you years ago, decades ago. All right? Good. That's wonderful. Let me ask you, has it been continuing where you have operated as though that invitation had expectation? Yes, you have been invited into this relationship, but do you operate as one who is in a relationship with God? Now, maybe that has ebbed and flowed, but right now, what does it look like? His expectation for me, for you, if you're in a relationship with him, is it actually looks like it. This demonstrated in the choices that we make, the life that we live. Has it been something that you thought, I don't really need because, well, you know, I'm kind of good enough. I mean, I go to church with some frequency. I tell the truth even on my taxes. I don't even steal paper clips from my desk at work. I'm just an honest, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm a pretty decent person. Let me just tell you that the invitation of God has always and continues to go to people who, regardless of what we have done, how many good things, we've still done plenty, where we are separated from him and we're not worth what he's done for us. So, what have you done with that invitation? What are you doing with that invitation? Let the truth of his word hopefully drive the point home. Will you bow your heads with me?